Radio Cairo English International Service presentes Special Program COP27 Egypt 2022.
To the listeners of Radio Cairo, I am Nicole Jungo el-Najjar, an activist from the Canary Island, and I present the speech by Aidil Borges on the importance of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, which will take place in the city of Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt from the 6th to the 8th of November 2022. Here is the speech. To the listeners of Radio Cairo, my thanks for this opportunity. I feel very honored to be able to be in this space. I am Aidil Borges from Cape Verde. I am an environmentalist and I have been dedicated to this task for exactly 30 years. I started working with environmental education in the early 90s when Environmental Training and Information Project was introduced in Sahelian schools, following the decision taken in 1987 at the summit of Dakar by the heads of state of the countries living on the outskirts of the Sahara Desert, known as Sahelian countries. Sahel is a word of Arabic origin, which means gates of the desert. 8 West African countries are part of an organization called CILSS, Interstate Committee for Drought Control in the Sahel, of which Cape Verde is also a member, being the only island state in the organization. CILSS is an organization that fights against climatic hazards in the region, and at some point it understood that to fight against this climatic surge, which seriously affects the region, schools must also be included in this fight so that children can contribute to this fight and be a vector of opinion and change of mentalities, work in a transversal way, including everyone in this fight. And thus began the first regional environmental education program on the African continent. Since then, my pact and my firm commitment to the environmental issue has been strengthened, and I am actively acting in the African environment of the West African sub-region, respectively in the CPLP and Ibero-American space. Currently, we have an environmental education program that involves these countries with a focus on emerging crises and climate change. I have always been very skeptical about the major decisions resulting from the COPs, because these are complex negotiations with different actors who, although sitting at the same table, have different ways, measures, and interests. However, I have to admit that over the last few years there has been an understanding and a willingness on the part of the stakeholders to build some small consensuses, which has led to serious negotiations, which in turn have resulted by positive gains for the planet and for humanity. For this COP27 precisely, my expectation is even greater, mainly because it is based on the African continent and because of the crises that are going through the planet and humanity at the moment. My expectations on the climate issues are very worrying because my country is inserted in an African Sahelian island context, which adds a set of factors which in themselves are not normal conditions favorable to development, state, nation. Cape Verde belongs to the group of peripheral countries of the world called SIDS, Small Island Developing States, which face many challenges starting with their own climatic vulnerability. Moreover, they are states isolated from their respective continents, sparsely populated, unlikely to create economies of scale and, therefore, subject to external shocks. On the other hand, they still entail high cost in terms of energy, transport, communication and infrastructure. Consequently, our survival in this framework that I have just described depends on good governance, environmental justice, public policies aimed at a coherent and committed environmental agenda with ambitious objectives such as the energy transition, which propose to increase the rate current energy coverage with clean and renewable energies from the current 22% at the national level to more than 50% in the next decade. Environmental education is one of the most important tools in this process. Above all, states and nations must have their own agenda for environmental education in their respective countries, covering all educational sectors, formal, non-formal and informal. They must also allocate resources within the budget states for its materialization and execution. I also see the need for African states to work towards developing a strategic plan for environmental education which should be configured as a mandatory public policy and be part of their respective development plans, SDGs. The choice could not be the best, both because of the context and the current situation that the world is going through. Well, humanity is facing war whose consequences are still completely unknown, and it will mainly affect the most vulnerable countries. So choosing a city in the name of peace is still a good omen for the anticipation of the results we want to obtain in this COP27. And the choice of Egypt is always a very successful option. Firstly, because it is a very populated Maghreb country and surrounded by the expanse of the desert, and on the other hand, Africa is rarely chosen as the scene of world events of this nature, especially when the subjects and issues involved are of greater importance and relevance to the countries and peoples of this continent. On the other hand, choosing Africa as a scene, a continent with many climatic vulnerabilities, because it is crossed in two by the equator and by two tropics to the north and south, respectively, a continent that is home to the largest hot deserts in the world, the Sahara in the Tropic of Cancer, north of equator, and the Kalahari and Mosammedes Desert in the Tropic of Capricorn, south of the equator, which are natural conditions that have always aggravated and weakened the continent from a climatic point of view, a situation that has worsened in recent years and which has become more and more accentuated due to climate change. I hope that the holding of COP27 in Egypt will be a stage of understanding and dialogue for the construction of a consensus at the level of world decisions, and above all, that the best decision will come out of it that meet the expectation of improvement of the living conditions of the planet, mainly those who represent the most vulnerable sections of the population. I thank the listener, the staff of Radio Cairo, and especially Mohammed El-Kamel and Amira El-Khalili for the opportunity of this integration between peoples and nations. Thank you all. Inshallah. Aidil Borges.
To the listeners of Radio Cairo, I am Jim Brown, an activist from Scotland, and I present the speech of Jose Felipe Ribeiro on the importance of the United Nations Conference on Climate Change, which will take place in the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, November 6th to the 18th, 2022. Here is the speech. Thanks to Radio Cairo and its listeners for the kindness of this interview. My name is Jose Felipe Ribeiro. Since 1977, I have been a researcher at Embrapa and on occasion an associate professor of botany and ecology at the University of Brasilia. I studied botany and ecology, gaining my master's degree at the University of Brasilia and a doctorate from the University of California. I began my research in the categorization of the vegetation of the Cerrado biome, and today I dedicate myself to research in productive environmental management and reconstitution, writing articles for newspapers and academic journals, trying to bring science closer to the public in general, considering that scientific knowledge can often seem too complex, but we have an obligation to reduce this distance between the information that science is producing in our daily life. Before starting, I'd like to praise and thank the organisers of COP27, the people of Egypt, and their legendary hospitality. It is exceptional to host people from all over the planet. I was invited here to talk about the Cerrado biome, which many consider the poor cousin of Amazonia. I have the impression many of our listeners have heard of Amazonia and its importance to our country and to the health of the planet. This tropical vegetation, which has occupied half the area of the country, stands out for its humid forests, which are disappearing due to erroneous management of nature. However, I want to talk about another tropical vegetation, one which is also disappearing, the Cerrado biome, which occupies 1/4 of the area of Brazil. Unlike Amazonia, which has rainfall rates that reach 2.2 metres, the Cerrado reaches 1.6 metres, which, compared with the deserts of Egypt, is still a lot of rain. However, this rain is seasonal and concentrated in our summer, lasting approximately 7 to 8 months from October to May. The other 4 to 5 months, June to September, hardly rain, with relative humidity reaching a mere 10%. things that inhabitants of Egypt will know well. Although we have some forests in this biome, these are usually associated with drainage lines of streams and rivers, or in areas of higher soil fertility, and they only cover less than 15% of the total area. The dominant vegetation is savanna and fields, which gives the characteristic landscape of the Cerrado biome. Because of the seasonal climatic conditions, with an intense and well-defined dry season, this dominant vegetation is practically an inverted forest, where the trees and shrubs of an average height of 5 to 6 metres have an extensive root system capable of fetching water up at depths of 15 to 20 metres. Thus, the very important factor of the Cerrado for Brazil and the planet is this relatively intense seasonal rainfall serves as a water catchment for the other national biomes. Almost 75% of the water circulating in the Tocantins River Basin in the Amazon region comes from the Cerrado. These numbers are even higher for the Parana, Paraguay basins in the Atlantic forest biome, where it reaches 80%, and finally the São Francisco River Basin, where the Cerrado is responsible for almost 96% of water circulating in this large Caatinga biome river. By these characteristics, the Cerrado biome is called the father of all waters. Finally, in this decade of restoration organised by the United Nations, I understand that environmental management and reconstruction of native vegetation in the Cerrado will have a positive impact in minimising climatic changes. In this matter, the Brazilian Republic must contribute to the well-being of the country and the planet. By understanding how national biomes work, and thus impacting them as little as possible, should be the target of political and environmental management. This management should initially work for environmental and social justice, for the quality of life of its population, contributing to the well-being of biodiversity, including our species, and the conservation of abiotic resources such as soil, water and air. The wonderful and significant opportunity that Egypt, and especially the City of Peace, Sharm el-Sheikh, is providing the planet is vital to show the reality present in each of the individual countries participating in COP27. I thank Amira El-Khalili for the invitation and the entire team of Radio Cairo for allowing this dialogue of integration between peoples and nations. Inshallah.